Alright, so it'll be another week or two before I see Hotel Transylvania 3, which means that we've managed to go a week in this month, avoiding the whole sequel theme that the release dates have somehow set up. That doesn't mean we weren't still able to squeeze a remake in, so at least there's that. Uh, so before once we get back into that, let's go into the three from this week, starting with Skyscraper. Skyscraper is going to be one of those movies that brings out those people, those very predictable people, to where it's like there's going to be a lot of people that rush to give this movie backhanded compliments, I imagine, because it's this, big, dumb action slash disaster movie. The Rock is the star of it. So, of course, you're going to have those people that come out and say, like, blow it out of proportion and say, like, oh, it's kind of fun, because these are also the people that made fun basically the most condescending word you could say about a movie. Um, and they'll say stuff like it was fun, but then they'll take like one little portion or one little line or something, just completely blow it out of proportion and say, "Oh, but this will go down in history as one of the dumbest things I've ever seen," or something like that. Just there's very insecure people that can't take to movies like this without being petrified that somebody will think they're an idiot for liking it or something. And I totally get if you just flat out don't like it. Kind of like the way I feel about San Andreas. Like, I really hated San Andreas, and I was kind of afraid that this would be something like that. But it's fine. Like, there's really no reason, there's nothing in it to, like, blow completely out of proportion. I'm sure most people probably forget about it by the end of the month, if not sooner. So it's not a movie like that, even though I'm sure some people will try to do it that way. It's like I said, some backhanded compliment or something when they're talking about how much they do kind of like it, but also, like I said, are just terrified as being seen as stupid or something because they kind of somewhat liked a movie like this. But anyway, so yeah, I was actually kind of pulled in pretty quickly by the opening shot. Um, which is this very interesting shot where it starts with like the moon and it's like this winter night of sorts. It's like snow against the night backdrop or whatever, and then it pans down and it's this sort of peaceful looking house in the middle of this snowy nowhere, and it's got like the lights and all that. And then as it continues to pan out, we realize that this is like a crime scene and it's like a hostage situation. And I found that to just be this really effective opening shot that just kind of really pulls you in immediately. And we do, because obviously, predictably, we're going to have some, tragic backstory for the Rock's character and what exactly made him this amputee. He's missing a leg, and ultimately how he meets Nev Campbell, which is kind of just rushed into it before we fast forward to present day. Um, but they do still kind of, manage that nicely. And obviously, going on this, as we go into the plot about the skyscraper itself, there's been a lot of comparisons to Die Hard, up to and including them basically embracing that and saying it's intentional and actually modeling one of the posters after Die Hard's poster. Obviously the comparison, it's obvious why the comparison's there, but I only maybe, apart from, there's guys taking over a building and it's really up to the one dude to stop it and all that, and his wife is in there. But really, a very large portion of the movie, I wasn't really thinking about that. Like, every now and then, sure, but overall, it does kind of feel like its own thing after a while. It does take on like, like the disaster movie type, like the Towering Inferno or something. But really, I felt like it kind of did its own thing fairly well for most of it. Oh God, the whole point of Die Hard is that he's inside the building the whole time. Like, the entire first half of this movie is him trying to get back into the building after having gotten out of it. um, so, yeah, and when we're introduced to this basically one setting we're going to be in for most of the time, there is a kind of a lot to like about it. Like, the way the effects really do it a nice service too, especially when we get those big drop off shots or whatever. But the whole thing where it's like when they go up into the building and they go on the elevator and it's like it kind of feels like a building version of the train in Snowpiercer is what it was kind of giving me a vibe of. And it's and he's being shown this by basically its creator, who is Shin Hon, who you probably recognize as Lao in The Dark Knight. It's the guy that basically created the whole thing and runs it, and the guy that the people who take over the building are. He has something that they're after, basically. Something very basic like that. And then, yeah, and obviously the designs, particularly inside the building, are, like, you know, really cool and really well done. And obviously we're going to get to a point where, when he was doing interviews, The Rock was basically saying stuff like, people with vertigo might have trouble with this movie. So of course that, you know, made my heart sink a little bit. And yeah, they do throw those moments in there. I do think it's maybe milked a little bit. Like they really, really like that downward shot. But they do find different ways to do that as well. Really, when it's worse, I think, is when he is climbing a crane that's pretty much the size of the building itself. And he, like, slips and shit. Like, that's when it kind of really did that for me. And then there's also, there's actually this really whole creative thing involving this sphere that's in the building, where it's, they basically can go in and it's this, you know, spherical thing, but then they can make it, like, invisible or translucent or whatever. So you're basically just standing on nothing is what it looks like and looking straight down. They have fun with stuff like that a lot. So, but it still kind of feels created anyway. You know, there are obviously going to be a lot of, you know, cliches in here. Like, of course this movie has the kid with asthma in it. If it's not a kid with asthma, it's a kid with allergies. And somehow, some way, these are going to come into play. Thankfully, I don't recall this getting, like, its own scene, like a lot of these movies do, to where it's like they make it like some big conflict in the middle just to kind of add shit for no reason. So it's like, it's kind of there, but it's not really too in the way, so I guess it's not that bad, which kind of makes you wonder its purpose to begin with, but... Alright, because he's the reason they end up stuck in the building, because something happens to him, but it has nothing to do with his asthma. He ate, like, bad candy, and that's why they were in the building when shit went down. So, don't really know what the point of the asthma thing is, but, alright. I guess it sort of gives off this sort of conflict that a kid with asthma stuck in a burning building is kind of a big deal, but, yeah, they don't really do that much with it. It's just kind of there. It's like his character trait or something. Because they do kind of try to, like, make him seem important, like, when, you know, the action's sort of breaking out and they're all kind of together, because this kid with the asthma is just, like, kind of been in the background here and not really doing or saying a whole lot except being a kid in jeopardy. And then there's, like, one scene where suddenly he's, like, this expert planner, and he, like, knows exactly where people should go and what's going to happen and all that. And then after this one scene, he's never like that again. He goes right back to just the kid in trouble that he was before. So that was a whole lot for nothing for that character. But, yeah. And obviously, in regards to, you know, the villains, there's going to be a lot of those scenes where they're all basically trying to kill him. And there's, like, 3 or 4 different times where they have the perfect opportunity to just shoot him in the face. And they've got their guns pointed right at him, too. But then for some reason, they just don't do it. Because they're the bad guys in this movie, and he's The Rock. So he's not gonna die that easily, so the movie just kind of has to have contrived ways to make them separate from him instead of just being able to shoot him before they run away. I mean, it takes a second, but it's just that kind of movie, so... yeah, not that we would expect them to just off him anyway. I mean, that's that's asking an awful lot of the movie, but there's also stuff, just some things in there that you just might, you know, that are easy to scoff at, like, there's, like, the times when there seems to be a lack of faith in the audience, because there are a lot of scenes where pretty much whenever he's gonna do something and he's alone, he just kind of talks to himself and says to himself what he's about to do or why he's doing it or what's going on. So that's a bit blatant in regards to, it just seems like to want to lay out the blueprints for the audience, just not even trying to hide that fact. There's stuff like, there's scenes that, you know, are thrilling enough, but then you have questions afterwards, like when they have to make this bridge that's just a board that Neve Campbell has to walk across or fall to her fiery death to get the kid to the other side. But the trouble is instead of having the kid walk across at once, they have her walk across it, then bring him back on her back. And it's like, I don't know. I don't know. It's the asthma kid. He's here just to cause problems anyway. So, yeah. Now, obviously, we know that Dwayne Johnson's likability goes a long way, especially in movies like this. So when just his presence alone makes you want to root for him. There's little moments like at the beginning when he's trying to basically learn one phrase in the dude's language so that he can at least greet him, and then he gives up and says, you know, screw it, I'll just high-five him. And it's like, that's such a Dwayne Johnson thing to say that we just take that as a character and like him even more for that. There's the whole his whole fascination with duct tape, how duct tape fixes everything. That's old as forever, but he still somehow manages to make it work. The line, if duct tape doesn't work, you're not using enough duct tape or something like that. And it's, yeah, like I said, it's these age-old character traits and these age-old lines that still he can just somehow bring this charismatic likability to, which we obviously just expect from him at all times now, and he's always able to do that. Interesting to see Neve Campbell in this, like, big, you know, blockbuster-type movie, after she kind of tried to stay out of that sort of spotlight. And she does actually, they do give her an interesting background, because obviously she's the wife in jeopardy with the kids and all that. But they do throw a little something into that by making her, like, ex-military, so she's able to, like, you know, fuck dudes up if she really wants to. And not just dudes. So, I mean, it's not, like, as often as you would probably hope after we learn her background and we know what she's capable of. It's something that we want to see more of out of her, but we only just kind of get it in these couple of moments that are really just payoff moments more than anything else. She doesn't just to kind of get to do it. It's just sort of like she only does it when it's supposed to be like this big moment that she can do it. So that's kind of unfortunate, but at least it's in there a little bit, which is more than a lot of roles like this can say. So, yeah, she gets to beat up villain Noah Taylor doing his very best Ben Mendelsohn impression. So, yeah, and then it's pretty much exactly what you expect it to be, given all of that. And obviously, I was talking about the sphere thing, and it's like, it's one of those movies where by the climax, everything is so incredibly predictable because they really, really not so subtly pretty much set up everything in its, like, first few scenes, where it's like there's things you see in the first few scenes where you're like, well, that's coming back for the climax. Like the thing where there's a whole lot of, there's the things in the sphere that cause a lot of reflections, and so it's like, it's actually still a really cool sequence, but you see it coming from a mile away, like after 10 minutes of movie, so, so yeah, but really, it's fine. The effects are actually quite good. There are moments where he's, like, hanging there, and it's like, even though it still jolts you, it's kind of like, well, I mean, obviously it's green screen, obviously, but still, it's fine. It works fine as what it is. Like I said, it's not something like, it's not something as bad as, like, San Andreas, which I know some people like San Andreas, so I don't know how you want to take that, but, yeah, like I said, people are going to blow out of proportion probably how dumb it is or whatever, but I mean, it's fine. It's exactly what you expect it to be, really, but it doesn't really do anything to go beyond that either, is it's kind of its problem, so yeah, that's just what it is. The end. Let's go to Netflix, where we have The Legacy of a Whitetail Deer Hunter, which I was really intrigued by because I was really surprised that when I heard about this, that I hadn't heard of it sooner. It was very recently I learned this existed, and apparently it was shot back in 2015, 3 years ago. where we have Jody Hill, who did Observe and Report and The Foot Way and stuff like that. I think he's responsible for Eastbound and Down and that Vice Principal show, I think. Just his collaborations with Danny McBride, basically, is what he's known for. And the way they do, like, this sort of... All those things I mentioned basically do, like, this parody of, like, that macho attitude in funny ways, but this goes into that category as well. Where we have Josh Brolin, of all people, has like these 3 really big movies out at the same time, and then does this sort of like small Netflix movie that he shot 3 years ago, just kind of comes out in the midst of it. And he's this very funny character, very funny idea for a character as well, where he's one of those dudes that does like hunting DVDs. That his friend Danny McBride shoots them, but he's basically like the one that conjures all of the scenarios and all that, and thinks that basically hunting is like this ultimate way of life, and that there's really nothing else to live for. And he's exactly the kind of guy you think of. He's brought his Llewellyn Moss look back. His hair's slightly longer. He's got the mustache, and it is a really funny setup. And he's also... There's also, like, a sort of an emotional thing they're trying to put in there, where the plot is he's bringing his kid out here to sort of say, like, you know, this will be the father-son bonding time, and the first time you kill a deer will be, like, when you're a man now, or something like that. But there's a distance because he's much more attached to Brolin's ex-wife and her soon-to-be new husband, who are Carrie Coon and Scoot McNairy. 2 names that are way too recognizable and way too talented for these tiny, tiny ass roles that they have that they get to do nothing with. They're basically cameos. So that was just an interesting addition in itself. But so yes, and obviously our central thing here, the thing to really watch the movie for, is what Brolin is doing. And yeah, even in a silly comedy like this, it's still so interesting how Brolin can like just become a character. And he's always able to find just the right tone, for this guy to be like, because this is a guy that could have probably been unlikable, but he still manages to find that he seems to know more about what to do than the script does with this character, interestingly enough. And and the funny thing about him also is, like I said, how he's got this lifestyle that he sees as like the ultimate thing, but he also sees himself as like this real like filmmaker of sorts, where he's talking about like he's really precise on exactly how Danny McBride's character should shoot this stuff, and how basically everything is sort of, you know, manufactured, but he's trying to make it as real as possible. He talks about what fits the narrative and what doesn't. You can tell they're taking shots at, like, sort of like the Bear Grylls type, where I was talking about, like, everything feels manufactured, and there's, like, the moment when they have to cross this, it's a bridge, but it's one of those bridges that's just, like, 3 ropes, where, like, 2 of your hands are one that you walk across. And Danny McBride's character has to go first, and then film him crossing it, and Danny McBride's character, like, emphasizes, good thing nobody's ever crossed it before, right? You can tell they're taking shots at, like, those, you know, Bear Grylls reality shows or whatever. So that's kind of funny, and sort of a welcome addition to this sort of territory as well. Then it's really this sort of... Doing the sort of mockumentary thing was kind of when it's really at its best moments. But obviously that ends up being very little of it. They really put the focus on his relationship with this kid. And of course he's got to be, you know... He's basically like... The way he talks and just the way he acts and like sees the world, basically, it's like... He's like an annoying 2010s version of Lucas Black and Sling Blade, is what he was coming off as. If Lucas Black and Sling Blade had a cell phone he wouldn't stop looking at, basically. And it's like, and they're basically trying to build up that he's this kid in today's world and all that, so it was like, but the thing is he's getting calls from his girlfriend, or whoever she is. And the first thing I noticed was, it's like, wow, he's taking calls instead of texting. That's... Okay, at least he's a little different like that, but obviously he's texting later. And they end up making his phone like this big thing, just the very expected thing to do with a character like this. Not to say it's not unrealistic, just, it's tired, you know, we could see something else. This movie could definitely you know, take it in a more unexpected direction or whatever, but it really doesn't. And you'd especially think, from the people behind it, they would have found a way to make it, you know, set it up like it's gonna be this direction, but then end up doing something else. But they really don't. It's kind of like they just kind of gave up on it at the script stage, and it was up to Brolin and to an extent Danny McBride to keep it alive. Which is ironic given that McBride is one of the writers as well. So, but the thing that McBride actually does here, in regards to this portion of the story, is that he does end up... The kid, weirdly enough, becomes more relatable when we see him through the perspective of McBride's character. How McBride's basically there to explain to Brolin, like, this is the way he is, and we should let him, you know, do this thing, and this is just who he is as a person or whatever. So that's interesting, and then the way they make McBride's character sympathetic, to an extent, the way he basically just kind of lets Brolin walk all over him, and we realize this is just basically the way it's always been, and he's just kind of the character that lets that happen. He's just kind of that pathetic. How he's willing to give up retirement because basically Brolin tells him not to. And he's been a character that just kind of lets everything roll off his back, and he's just like, alright. It's just his response to everything is okay, with a smile on his face. We know that's building to a scene that we know is coming. Once again, we see from a mile away. But there's also something really off about this character, too, the McBride character, because, I mean, they do set up this thing pretty early where, like, he'll just randomly go into this hole of sexual dialogue that he can't seem to dig himself out of. And it's almost like McBride wrote that for his character, because it's like, he thinks that kind of raunchy dialogue is like what's expected of his characters. Because it really hardly fits. Whenever this character starts like this, it seems to come from out of nowhere. Even though we learn about he's like that early on, it still just seems really sort of random in the worst way when he does it. The scene where he shows pictures of his girlfriend in a gangbang, and it's just like, where the fuck does this come from? And why? That's the most important question. Why is it in here? Because it really doesn't add anything to the character. It doesn't say anything about it either. He's just kind of suddenly raunchy occasionally. And it's just weird. It's definitely a miscalculation. And then eventually it gets about to the last 15 or 20 minutes or so, and then it starts trying to be all profound and shit. Like, it'll do that thing where it'll talk about stuff later, and then when that stuff comes back, it's supposed to be like this really big, profound moment for the characters or whatever. And it tries to play it, like, totally straight, too. There's, like, no sort of self-aware kind of thing in these moments, either. It's supposed to be, like, when the movie's really hitting some big, you know, emotional moment, and it just does not. If anything, it makes the movie feel dumber than it was when it was being intentionally dumb. Then when it's trying to be serious, it just becomes dumber. And that's just really feels off. But there is a heart in there somewhere that Brolin and McBride are doing their absolute best to bring out. And Brolin is doing a very good job at. But, you know, still, it's just not quite adding up. If there's one thing about it, it's very short. It's like an hour 20 in total. And there's, like, and it does manage to have, like, you know, every now and then there's, like, a decent shot in it, occasionally. But, yeah, just overall, it doesn't really work the more sort of serious it tries to play itself. It really should have been more like, if this was played up more like a Christopher Guest movie, that also kind of would have been a played-out concept, but it would have been better than what we came up with, probably. If it also tried to basically stay funny and self-aware throughout, instead of, like, abandoning that halfway through and trying to actually be this real story of father and son and have these real emotional moments in it, it probably would have worked a lot better as just a straight comedy. So that's really where it fails and really drops. And something you don't really expect from these people, because obviously they do have, you know, sincere moments in their movies, but there's still something. Like, these are the guys that created a character as fucking insane as Ronnie Barnard from Observe and Report. And it's like, for them to try something like this, it just feels like it just doesn't belong. So that's kind of where it really falls short, unfortunately. But like I said, Brolin is really doing something here, but it's It just doesn't feel like it's in the right movie after a while. But at least he was able to balance the tone even when the script and the filmmakers couldn't. So, alright, we're going to end on Superfly. I'll be honest with you, I kind of thought this movie was just called Superfly, almost like kind of an homage, and it was just going to be some generic crime movie. Didn't realize it was like supposed to be a direct remake until like right before I saw it. So, so this is where, and I kind of hate to make this like oh, this is what this did wrong because the original did this, but I mean, for a movie as like influential and recognizable and just really this, you know, big thing of its time, you're gonna have it's gonna be hard to avoid comparing them. So, because here's the thing: is when you watch the original movie from '72, you see like, you know, it had like the film scratches still in it and everything, and it just kind of had like this particular style and like the cars and pretty much everything about it just is like synonymous with the '70s, and the whole thing of how like that's really just that whole '70s thing is like a very large part of that movie's identity. It's just how damn '70s it all is. But this movie decides to make it present day, like 2018, and set it in this very generic crime world that we've seen in a lot of crime movies recently, sometimes this year. Like, this and something like Den of Thieves could probably be in the same universe. And we're remaking Superfly. I think you can immediately see where there's a problem here. And when you talk about that also, you have Ron O'Neal, who was the original priest, and then you have this guy, Trevor Jackson, and you can tell, this guy probably has talent in him. I think he comes from like a lot of TV. I'm not really that familiar with him, but what I noticed in this particular movie is that he definitely lacks that like instant presence that O'Neal had in the original movie. And I think and it was also just kind of like, I think O'Neal's appearance had a lot to do with that too, like the long hair, the facial hair, the fur coats and all that. There's just something that instantly grabbed your attention about him. Like, he really stood out in a crowd. This guy doesn't really stand out amongst the people he's around. And there's certainly not the effortless charisma that O'Neal had in that role either. It was also, like, really, really downplayed, too. Like, when he didn't really have to do anything when he walked into a room to control it. It was just his presence alone. And you don't get that at all here. Because when it starts off, he walks in and it's sort of like, he sort of comes off like in it, like he's already supposed to be in it, you know. He's, you know, the big deal here. It's the same plot as before, when he wants to do the one big last score so that he can retire and just off that money. But the thing here is that this is a guy where the second he walks into the room and you see him, you know, interact with all the people there and all that, I got the feeling that this guy was like a rookie of sorts. Not a guy that was on the verge of retiring, by any means. And that definitely also comes through in this very poor decision to do narration. Where, like I said, it feels like this is a guy that's, like, just gotten into it and realizes he's, like, over his head. This does not feel like a guy that is, like, been here for a while and is in control of everything and is on the verge of being done with it. It feels like it's, like, just started. And so that, it just immediately, it feels off, because they don't have the character down at all, let alone the setting. So that's becomes a really big problem, and it's basically like, we go from like, a surprising amount of the original movie is set during the day. Like, you know, chases happen, and crimes happen, and drug deals happen. Even, like, the end of that movie, like, the climax of that movie is all during the day. But, of course, we've got to take this and basically set it in what kind of looks like Suicide Squad's Gotham. To where, like, it's all night scenes, it's all dark-ass streets, it's all dark-ass clubs. And it just gives it this really generic look of all these damn crime movies. It also seems like every now and then they're trying a little bit of Michael Mann when they're on the streets. It's not working. It's not even close to that level. And it's like, and the more they seem to just kind of get farther away, the more I was like, but you know, they keep the same plot, they keep the same character names, they're still going to try to be Superfly. So it's like, I'm absolutely dreading that moment that we're going to hear Pusher Man, because it's like, they're going to so try to convince us that they're still being Superfly, no matter how far away they get from it. And it's not going to feel at all like, oh yeah, now I'm feeling like it's Superfly again. Now, because you know that's what they're going for when they put that song in there. And yeah, it really didn't take long. The song shows up twice. There's the time when they're sort of dealing around, obviously, but then there's also the end. It comes back as well. And it's just like, the more they add elements to it to try to say, oh, don't worry, we're still Superfly, the farther away it seems to be, because they've already fucked up everything else. And then you get, like, even the long bath scene they try to recreate. If there's one problem, okay, they made a lot of changes, obviously, but the problem here is that if there's one problem I have with the original movie, it would be the bath scene. Because the bath scene is, like, excruciatingly long for no reason whatsoever. Except to, like, focus in on her ass. That's the reason the bath scene is so long. So it's like, all the things they could have not carried over from the first movie. But it's like, nope, we're going to have that scene. But here's the thing, it's not going to be a bath, and it's not going to be just him and his girl. No, it's going to be a shower, and it's going to be a three-way, and it's going to be shot in a way that screams, this director was a music video director. Because of course he was. And this scene, among many other scenes in the movie, will just scream that in your face. That this is a guy that is not so much about being cinematic, but he's a music video guy. And he has somehow tried to tell the story of Superfly through this lens, and it is the disastrous results you expect it to be. Now, on top of that, also, there's one thing they did sort of do that works. That is when they kind of somewhat expand on the character of Scatter. Like, they give him a bit more screen time. He's played by Michael Kenneth Williams now. He was Julius Harris in the original movie. That's a character to where it's like, yeah, if you're going to give a character more screen time, it would be that one. But he still feels incredibly underutilized, especially getting an actor like Michael Kenneth Williams to play him, because that was a really good casting choice. And they were going in the right direction, but still it just felt like it was falling short. Even when it feels like the movie is doing something it should be doing, it still doesn't quite get there. And then they add in these characters of the bad cops, where you know immediately it's going to be awkward. And I'm sure they're trying to say something about today's society, where you got the white cops shooting Fat Freddy and all that. Because we know Fat Freddy's doomed, but they obviously do it in a very different way in this movie. Like I said, but maybe they're trying to make a statement, but the movie is not strong enough or smart enough to completely feel like it's going through with that for it to have any impact whatsoever if they're trying to use it to say something. So obviously the first movie also had something to say, especially about its own era, but so yeah, like I said, I guess in a way, if you're trying to do that, only put it in today, well, it's going to be difficult for you to say something that hasn't really been said a million times before in much more effective ways, but to do it in the way that you do it, you're just making it so much worse. You knew you were in for something awkward with these characters. When we have this scene, this just gets more and more awkward as it goes. It's probably supposed to be tense, I guess, but it just got more awkward the way it went. Where the cop is searching the car, finds cocaine and all that, and this whole time he's singing Riding Dirty a cappella. It's ridiculous. But I mean, that's only the tip of the iceberg in regards to ridiculous to these bad cop characters, because the other bad cop, the one that seems to be more in charge, is played by Jennifer Morrison from House. She was Cameron on House. She's really trying to do, like, this really tough, threatening antagonist thing, and she absolutely, completely humiliates herself. This is one of the most embarrassing performances I have seen for a while. And it's like, I just knew exactly how embarrassing this performance was going to be the second I saw her neck tattoo. And it's like, this is not the actress for this. She hasn't even really done anything particularly stand out yet, I don't think. Even on House, it was just like, you know, she's there, she's part of the team, but whatever. And to try and play a character like this tough, you know, bad guy sort of character, it just, like, it's really, like, I struggle to even talk about it because I just wanted to fold up inside myself and hide watching it. It's really, no. Just don't ever do anything like that again, please. And then, of course, it goes on, and here's the problem, is that you might remember how, like, slick and swift the first movie was. It was an hour and a half. The scenes were long, so they felt like it was telling a very simple story, but in a very nicely paced way. Like I said, the scenes were long, but that actually makes the movie feel shorter because it feels like there's not very many scenes in it, and it feels consistent with what the story is, and there's not a lot of extra fat in it. This movie adds about a half an hour, and adds storylines. Like, there's a whole vendetta subplot now with the Snow Patrol, this little gang that dresses in white, that did something stupid and shot somebody, and they're now blaming Priest for it. Basically because he was the one the gun was aiming at to begin with. No, because this guy's a trigger-happy young idiot. It's now a vendetta against Priest, and there's a whole subplot all the way to the end of the movie devoted to this, starting at the very beginning. So that's a good use of time. They're stretching the wrong damn things out. There's one particular scene when there are two girls fighting over Fat Freddy, and it's played for comedy. And this basically gets its own scene. It's its own whole scene. And it's like, you can see how they managed to stretch this out another half hour and just ruin any kind of great, you know, nicely paced setup they had before. The pacing is absolutely terrible here. It feels so damn long and feels never fucking ending. And it's like when everything... The original movie is like way too abrupt. It ends way too soon. I know it had one sequel, technically two, but, and it's like, it's almost like, why didn't they just go into SuperFly TNT while they were at it? If they were just gonna keep going, then just keep going. But, yes, and it becomes excruciating after a while, especially when it's like they took the story, and not only did they put it in present day, but they took all the mediocre qualities of, like, modern movies that you see, and put them into this as well, to make it feel more like a modern story. It was like, well, let's make it feel like the shittiest of modern movies. Why not? It almost feels intentional. But no, it's not. It's not that self-aware at all. And like I said, they do try by throwing things in there like Jason Mitchell as Eddie, which is, I don't know that I would have cast him, but he's certainly not a bad choice. I do think there's more actors that are, like, you know, a bit more scenery chewing that could have played Eddie, but Jason Mitchell's much more of a downplayed actor, but but yeah, still, you know, he has a nice enough presence that he fits in the role well, but I probably would have cast somebody else, talented as Jason Mitchell is. But then you have stuff like by the end, when it becomes an action movie. They've put a car chase in this. And I'm not talking like a bullet-style car chase, like something old-fashioned like that. No, this has a couple of explosions in it. They put explosions in SuperFly. In car chases that feel like, yeah, today's car chases. It doesn't work. It doesn't add up. There was no fucking reason to this. I'm usually one of those people that's like, if a movie gets remade, I'm the one that says, well, let's see what they do with it. Let's see what it looks like through another person's vision. Let's see what it looks like in another time. Sure, maybe it'll be, you know, something worthwhile. Maybe they'll have something to say about the story. Maybe they'll make it more relevant or something. But no, there's no damn reason to this. They would have been much better off just trying to recreate the 70s feel. If they did that, we still would be saying there's no point to this. But I mean, like I said, a movie that's so synonymous with the 70s and has the 70s is such a big portion of its identity, this, like, basically feels like you're entirely going against it trying to do it like this. So it's like you were actually better off trying to just make it set in the 70s again and do something like that. Maybe this could have worked if they made it more like American Gangster. I actually think one of the alternate titles to American Gangster before it became American Gangster was The Return of Superfly, which is obviously also the name of the third movie in this trilogy. But, yeah, this just... There's no reason for this, and the movie does absolutely everything in its power to tell you that up front. If you want to call that a compliment, I guess. So, yeah, that's what that was. So, we're done here. Speaking of American Gangster, we have The Equalizer next week, I think, which is very exciting. And maybe some other things. Like I said, I don't know if I'm going to see Hotel Transylvania this coming week or the week after, but it'll be somewhere in there. If you even care. It's Hotel Transylvania 3. So, yeah, and obviously we're continuing with the Versus theme as well. So all that stuff. You know what's coming.